I was about to open this video, like all the others I made a few months ago, with the typical, hey guys, welcome to my newest post-playthrough thoughts and review video, and that whole formulaic structure to these reviews, but then I got to thinking, with that old structure of video, I'm actually really bad at keeping things concise, or critical, or funny. So, starting now, I'm going to be mixing things up a little bit. I used to think I should start focusing on some specific details more to make a better review, but that kind of started inflating my video length, and I think I can really improve the quality with a few changes. I'm still going to be going over my history with the games we played, and I'll give my general thoughts on the playthrough, but I'm ditching the structured sections that I used to include. While they made writing easier, I definitely have more creative freedom without them. So that's great. If all goes well, the video will be shorter, which is good for me, but also better, which is good for you. So, if I'm going for short videos, what's our first game with the new format? The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion is my second foray into the Elder Scrolls franchise, the first being Skyrim, which I played for the first time in 2018. While it was initially hard for me to start playing these games, I quickly fell in love with Skyrim's fantasy open world, and had planned this playthrough since that time. Needless to say, I was looking forward to Oblivion. My character this time around was Johanna, the chaotic neutral psychopath who does things solely because they might be fun, and who ended up in jail at the start of the game for killing someone in a bar fight, but she's a good person, I promise. Her class was Jungler because she roams Cyrodiil, ganking every city against their will and storing up as much trouble as she does good deeds, and I promise you it's a complete coincidence that both my characters so far have been Khajiit. Some may call me insane. I call myself an artist, a visionary, a moron who decided to play a heavy armor-based mage tank fighter with a mace. Look, I can't help it. I just love my weird hybrid magic builds because I think they give me a great opportunity to explore as many of the game's systems as possible on my first playthrough. So in my mind, the natural progression of having a spellsword assassin in Skyrim was to substitute the stealth for a shield in Oblivion. Oblivion having a cast button was also a major reason why I decided to go for this, because now I was allowed to carry both a weapon and a shield, as well as having access to a full hotbar of spells, which I greatly appreciated. So ultimately I did try to roleplay a bit, albeit with a character that would be interested in lore as well as both good and evil oriented storylines, and I did commit to my unorthodox build. That should explain why I suffered as I did. That's all of my magic. There we go. Hit once. When do they stop attacking? I just need to find my openings. That was not my opening. That was not even close to my opening. They attacked like 5 times. Jesus Christ. Oblivion opens up with this grand open world and says, hey you, go wherever you want. To which the player says, holy shit, that sounds amazing. I'm gonna go this way. Only to discover that regardless of which way you chose to go, something was going to beat your ass into submission until you cried more than once. It's got kind of the same early game hurdle as Breath of the Wild, where a new player is not only unfamiliar with the game's systems, but also weak in general, creating a frustrating trial by fire until you learn and loot enough to survive a 1v1 with a bandit. Gold for repair hammers is not in abundance, and your spells are not good as you start, so good luck, especially if you're a fucking jungler. I was probably supposed to swap my weapons and armor a bit more frequently in the early game, though. Part of the problem is Oblivion's level scaling. Since your skills start very low, you'll level up very fast, but so do the enemies, meaning they'll quickly outpace you in the early game. The first quarter of my playthrough was spent scrounging together whatever I could just to keep up. But once I got a foothold in the game, combat proved to be extremely fun. My skill development and gear eventually left me with many options in fights, but there were still 2 minor frustrations. Firstly, my build's weakness was my susceptibility to being knocked down or stun-locked. But it wasn't clear until very late that this was because of my low agility stat. The wording used in the skill tree implies that stats affect skills, but actually it's the other way around, and knowing this changed how I approached my level up substantially. Secondly, Oblivion is the most fluid concussion simulator I've ever experienced. If you get stunned, your character will still execute the action that they tried to execute before getting hit, as if that's the only thing they can remember. So you may end up swinging your weapon when you really need to heal now, and frustratingly, you also can't swap to a new spell while stunned, even though there's no animation. Because, fuck you, Bethesda coded this, I guess. It's a bizarrely clunky system in what's otherwise very fluid combat mechanics. Skyrim's magic, it gives you a neatly organized set of tools to choose from to get the job done. Oblivion's magic system is more of a collection of booze that you can mix together in dangerous quantities to give someone a very, very bad time. The spellcrafting is awesome, allowing magically inclined characters to create their own tools of destruction and supplement their builds in very unique ways, some of which can be catastrophically overpowered. But unfortunately, you really need to be a magic specialist to get the most out of this system. I made a few neat spells to fortify my magicka while applying soul traps and making my foes more susceptible to my other spells and whacking stick, and I felt that I could get creative to a degree, but the really cool stuff you can do is locked behind high magicka costs and high skill requirements, which is understandable, but I couldn't even make an effective fireball that healed me under my build's restrictions. I wanted to recklessly blow things up now, not later when I come back with a pure mage character. When I streamed Skyrim last summer, I determined it was a lack of direction that turned me away from my first failed playthrough many years before, and I decided to structure my adventure around the major quest lines. This seems to be how I enjoy open world games, because if I wanted to think a lot, I'd play D&D instead. Oblivion was the same way. Going in, I knew about most of the major quest lines and factions, and I made a plan on how I'm going to follow them. I decided to start with the main storyline. So first I did the Mages Guild. I planned to stop in and develop Johanna's skill set a bit because she was very weak, but as it turns out, it's not exactly easy to just barge into a guild and demand to use their spellcrafting resources after declaring yourself a member. So I ended up putting the main storyline on hold about halfway through to complete this questline in its entirety. To its credit though, the progression in this guild was well structured. In Cyrodiil, necromancy has been outlawed by the Mages Guild, and so the plotline revolves around an evil necromantic cult, but I like how you're exposed to this. As an initiate, you're traveling between all the guild outposts in each town, completing an odd job for each one, some of which are simple but fun quests to remind you that you're still a novice, while others hint at what's to come. The Mages Guild was a huge step up from the underwhelming College of Winterhold in Skyrim, but it wasn't without its own faults. You fight necromancers and the undead, so the enemy variety really isn't that high. Furthermore, it introduced what I'm calling Oblivion Final Boss Syndrome, which plagued all of the major quest lines, where the narrative leads up to your final confrontation with a very powerful foe who already died while I was recording this line. That said, the Mages Guild presented a strongly crafted and engaging narrative with some really creative quests. I'll give an honorable mention to the Skingrad Vampire quest, which forced me to think and craft spells specifically to solve a problem, that being a need to legally murder someone. I also liked how some quests could potentially put me at risk of contracting a disease that stopped magic regeneration, again, forcing me to think outside the box. It was a great quest line to introduce myself to the game. I made a plan on how I'm going to follow the quest lines. I decided to do the main storyline second. As it turns out, you've been let out of jail at a fairly dangerous time in Cyrodiil.
There was a huge creature, something out of a nightmare. Came right over the walls,
That
blasting
sounds horrifying.
fire that swarmed around it, killing.
The Beyond
I'm
Skyrim,
getting
that's
out
actually
before
so
it's too
cool.
late. They'll be here any minute, I'm telling you. Run when you can.
I'm not running. I'm not running at all. You're running back to Kvatch! You fool! That's the wrong way! The Oblivion crisis has started all across Tamriel, and Daedra are pouring into the world as Mehrunes Dagon, a major Daedric prince and all-around negative influence for your children, attempts to overrun the mortal plane by toppling the Emperor's dynasty. This questline follows yourself and Martin Septim, the heir to the throne, as you attempt to stop this invasion. With Martin's help, your job is to close the Oblivion gates and restore him to the throne, which is harder than it sounds because it's not enough that people actually recognize him as the Emperor. There's a whole process which Dagon's goons actively try to stop because that will inhibit their invasion. And no, I'm not going to go in depth into the lore that makes the idea of an Emperor's existence stopping an extraplanar demon invasion make sense. The point is, you get to visit the realm of Oblivion. And it sucks. A lot. To give the game credit, the unique Oblivion gates with plot relevance are well designed, and I enjoyed traversing them. And the realm of Oblivion itself is visually interesting. But to introduce another Zelda comparison, Oblivion's main story mimics Spirit Tracks in some of its quest structure. The main story-related side quests are all backloaded into the latter half, meaning some serious pacing issues arise from having to enter too many gates in succession. And there's only so many maps, so you'll see the same ones over, and over, and over, and over. You can only clobber so many Dremora Markinazes with a mace before bashing skulls just doesn't do it for you anymore. If you finish the main story too, all of the gates close, cutting you off from ever acquiring more sigil stones, which are the strongest enchanting tools until very late in the game. It's just very tedious, making Oblivion itself one of my least favorite parts of Oblivion. But the main storyline had quite a lot more good than bad, with some heavily engaging quests. The last few quests gave me not only the best Oblivion gate, but also a significant lore dump and a difficult final battle that finally offered a genuinely fair challenge. The main story may be bogged down by pacing issues and monotony, but when it's good, it's really good, and the narrative kept me engrossed the whole way through. The arena came next, and honestly, I thought I was heading into another questline the length of a guild. Nope, it's nothing but a series of combat trials with an optional side quest that does change the outcome of the story. I could have done it in 2 hours if I didn't need to recharge my soul gems, but I at least appreciate that there is a caveat in that I couldn't bring in my own armor, therefore losing all of my magicka buffs and forcing me to adjust my style. Some fights were forgettable, but others were a fun and fair challenge, so although it was short, I enjoyed my time at the arena.
Bayazura, Bayazura, Bayazura! It's the Grand Champion! I can't believe it's you standing here next to me.
Also, this guy was fun, but I pulled a Mr. Incredible on him and left him on the side of the street forever. Sorry, kid.
Yeah!
Next, Johanna decided to refine her combat skills by joining the Fighters Guild, which I felt was weaker overall than the Mages Guild. It had a similar foundation of general guild work mixed in with the introduction of the Central Tension, which deals with a rival guild offering their services at rates and speeds that the Fighters Guild simply can't keep up with. Contracts come from 3 major outposts, and the choral quests are by far the most interesting, but in my eyes, the Fighters Guild questline really pushes that you are a mercenary. You will never be more than a mercenary, and your hopes and dreams are invalid. It's on a smaller scale than the Mages Guild, and even when you're thoroughly in the middle of dealing with the Central Tension, you'll get contracts with no bearing on that storyline. To its credit, the Fighters Guild does develop and wrap up satisfyingly, and it has its good moments and solid quests, but as a whole there's more okay moments than great ones. It works thematically, and offers a different role-playing approach, but it's a little less cohesive and exciting than the other questlines I'd played through before. So the Fighters Guild may have been the Oblivion equivalent of a ham sandwich in a brown paper bag, but that only made the next questline stand out more, because what could be more exciting than being a holy paladin of light who smites all the unbelievers? I took on the Knights of the Nine afterwards, and was pleasantly surprised by how interesting some of the quests are. There's a heavy focus on puzzles and problem solving, not just on dungeon crawling. But there's also a decent degree of smiting Daedra and the undead. My main criticism is that it's so short. Each quest leads you to one of the 9 relics, some of which ended up being extremely useful for Johanna, but my expectation, having played Skyrim's expansions, was that I'd get a full guild-sized experience. Apparently it's easier and faster to earn the favor of every single divine and become their holy champion than it is to take down a group of ordinary price-gouging thugs. And sure, being a moral paragon and renowned paladin is awesome, but what could be more fun than being an absolutely unhinged assassin? The Dark Brotherhood is the only reason I wrote Johanna's personality as I did, because it gave me an explanation for her taking such an evil path. It sounds like a lot of fun, and fortunately for me, it lived up to the hype. The Dark Brotherhood has, in my opinion, the strongest set of quests out of all major base game guilds and plotlines. In the early phases, your missions have a main objective and a bonus. Making an effort to complete the bonus allows for some extremely dynamic gameplay, especially with the approach I took where I made an attempt to complete the entire questline without gaining a bounty. The gods must gossip to random citizens though, because there's some absolutely infuriating mechanical aspects to this questline, and I have no idea why the quests were programmed this way. Sometimes you can kill someone absolutely undetected, and yet on the quest advancing to the next stage, you get a bounty anyway. Even worse is the infamy system. You're an infamy on quest completion, forbidding me from wearing my Crusader's relics. Again, regardless of if you were ever caught in the act. So either Johanna decided to bathe in the blood of her enemies without me noticing, or the citizens of Cyrodiil just started throwing accusations of being a horrible sinner her way solely because she changed her clothes. It's obnoxious. Though all of your quests involve murder, the variety is outstanding. You visit some really interesting destinations, changing your plan of attack based on a wide variety of factors. The central tension of the questline comes into play only in the second half, but foreshadowing and tiny details throughout the whole thing make the big reveal extremely impactful. Speaking of impactful, much like in Skyrim, the Dark Brotherhood likes to absolutely ravage you emotionally at times, making this questline compelling even without its excellent quests. If you're considering your first playthrough and don't know which questlines to hit, make sure this is one of them. But in planning my path through the game, I intended to leave the best for last. And I think I absolutely succeeded by leaving the Shivering Isles. Throughout the game, you may notice that Oblivion's NPCs interact like a dysfunctional family forced to see each other once a year at Christmas. In general, Oblivion's NPCs are terrible, but at this point they're so infamous that they're a genuine selling point for the game. Between their questionable conversations and personal agendas that lead to a seemingly random tendency to attack and steal from each other, these NPCs are unintentionally funnier than I could ever be. Eridor, you're not vanquishing me.
Well met.
They can be a lot less interesting when you actually start talking to them, though. I did enjoy the rumor system, which allows you to discover quests and interesting tidbits just through talking, but after a certain point, there's really not any reason to revisit the NPCs. In typical Bethesda fashion, each character that shares a race and gender also shares a voice actor. Some of these, like the Redguard male, are well acted, but some of the lines feel a little disjointed or flat, which becomes more annoying when the pronunciation of people's names is inconsistent. The celebrity voice actors like Sean Bean and Patrick Stewart put in solid performances, especially since they were given fleshed out and interesting characters to voice. But I just couldn't help but feel late into my playthrough that the people of Cyrodiil were a lot more interesting to watch than to actually interact with. Then, the province of Cyrodiil itself is beautiful. In terms of environments, Oblivion holds up very well graphically. Someone being genuinely surprised that Johanna was an Oblivion character who doesn't look horrendously ugly is something we can talk about another time. The point is, I genuinely enjoyed exploring the province of Cyrodiil. The size of the world felt large, but manageable if I decided to go on a long walk. It was peaceful, and the soundtrack for this game only made it better. Oblivion's peaceful melodies like Harvest Dawn and Sunrise of Flutes are iconic and beautiful. Its combat music was orchestral and powerful. The cave ambience was creepy, and there were enough songs in each of these three main classes of music that the soundtrack didn't get stale. Being an open-world game, there wasn't any music made to push any emotions or hidden undertones used to augment certain moments of the game, but I don't think it needed that. Oblivion is a pretty game. But after several dozen hours, it just doesn't have that same charm. The NPCs still have a few tricks up their sleeves, but they're just not as interesting. The map is mostly explored, and you've seen the same types of enemies over and over and over again. It's the point where you know the game still has more to offer, but it doesn't really have that same allure as when you stepped out of the Imperial prison. It's not bad. I think it just reflects that point where I've seen enough, where Oblivion would again become far more enjoyable if I came back a year later with a new character to see it all anew, where I could approach the game with that sense of nostalgia I developed over these last few months and set out on a new journey to see what I missed. But that's far too wholesome a thought for what I actually did next. Welcome to the Shivering Isles, the batshit insane realm of Sheogorath, the Daedric Prince of Madness, where the NPCs are cranked up to 11, their absurdity on display in their dialogue as well as in their actions. Welcome to the Shivering Isles, where the scenery of the bright realm of Mania and of the gloomy swamps of Dementia are genuinely some of the most beautiful environments in the entire game, especially when the night sky of the Isles is introduced. Welcome to the Shivering Isles, which gives you entirely unique enemies, new lands to explore, countless extra quests, weapons, and armor unseen before you stepped into the Isles, and in my opinion, the best expansion pack I've played in the entire Elder Scrolls franchise, despite the fact that it made me feel like I'd just been exposed to several hallucinogens at once. Right when I was starting to feel done with the game, the Shivering Isles breathed new life into it in a deeply confusing yet captivating way. Sheogorath himself is by far the most entertaining character in the entire game, and interacting with him is a treat. Many of the main quests have minor choices in them, which influence your path through madness. I mean, you're still pretty much just going insane, so the choices don't matter a lot, but I appreciate their presence for roleplaying. The quests themselves might not be the same high standard as the Dark Brotherhood, but I feel that the whole narrative of the Isles is much stronger, and the experience is augmented by how new everything is. The Shivering Isles presents some hilarious interactions and allow you to do some really fucked up things to people through its quests, which is perfect for my impulsive, homicidal maniac of a character, and also perfect for myself who prefers to play this sort of game a bit seriously. And on top of its main quests, there's some fantastic side quests that make you exclaim things like, wow, this is really fun and creative, and Vythorn is doomed. Finishing my playthrough with the Isles was the best decision I made, outside of choosing to play the game in the first place. And that's in essence my experience with The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion. It's a flawed game for sure, as are most Bethesda games, but it's also a flawed game that I willingly put over 100 hours into with no regrets. And it's a flawed game that I fully intend to revisit after a few years pass. And that time, I can ignore my destiny and never set foot into another Oblivion gate again. But, in all seriousness, this game gets my full recommendation. The freedom available to play how you want is incredible, provided that you're willing to suffer a bit at first to make the unorthodox work. If you've played Skyrim and want more, or even if you've never touched the Elder Scrolls in the first place, I'd definitely give this one a shot. If for no other reason but to see the unintentional comedy that the NPCs generate exclusively for your playthrough. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and if you caught my Oblivion streams, thanks for sharing this adventure with me. I'd love for you all to tell me what you thought of the game or of this review in the comments below. And if this is the first you've seen of my content, you can find me at twitch.tv/turkeysub23. Have a wonderful night, and don't forget, if you stop by the stream, there is cheese for everyone! Or, wait, maybe it's actually cheese for no one.